In my last two videos, I demonstrated ways of using INI mods to improve the performance of some Unreal Engine 5 games on Winlator and Gamehub on Snapdragon 8 devices, which involved quite a lengthy and complex process to be able to install them. I've discovered a much more easier way to do this. In fact, it's so easy that I'm embarrassed that I wasted all that time showing you the previous method. Now, the reason why you had to make the config files read-only was that Unreal Engine would overwrite your config files with the default config files of the game. Previously, you would have had to find a free app called Mount Manager, which is not the easiest app to find a reputable source from, after Google had it removed from their app store. Then you would have had to reinstall Winlator with injected document provider so that you can access the config files inside the C drive of your container. I found this page on the Unreal Engine developer website. Scrolling to the bottom, I found this launch command, and it looks like this will allow you to use your own config files to overwrite the default config files. Clicking on the categories link, it goes to a section that shows all the names of the config files that every UE5 game would ship with. The most important is Engine INI, but in some cases you may want to mod game user settings and scalability INI. Now why don't we give this a try? Now you can use any file manager and text editor. For this example, I'm using Zarchiver. I'll use Expedition 33 as an example. First, you need to go into the folder of where the exe that you are launching is in. Majority of cases, I will always launch using the shipping exe. That way, I won't have to deal with these pesky redistributables. Create a new INI file. You can probably call it anything you want. I'm going to call mine My Engine INI, and then create the second INI file, which I'm going to call My User Settings INI, to override the default engine and game user settings configs. When you first try to launch this game on the Snapdragon 8 Elite, it will be very slow. There is some improvement with the latest drivers, but it could do better. Now remember in my last video, if you had bothered to watch to the end instead of complaining about "I warned you," you would have found out about this variable. Now open up the Engine INI file you just created and put this variable inside. Then go into the Winlator settings of your game shortcut where you would normally set the DX11 launch command in the Advanced tab and add these commands. Make sure you check your spelling and that the names of the INI files exactly match those of the ones you just created. Now when you launch the game, you should notice that the frame rate constraint has been released. But still, with this game, if you try to go into the actual game on a Snapdragon 8 Elite, you'll still encounter a lot of problems. If you open up your custom Engine INI file, you'll notice that it will suddenly be populated with a whole bunch of variables. Have a play around with these and see which ones you adjust might make a difference. The bulk of the variables are the ones at the top under the renderer settings section. If you open up your custom user settings INI, you'll see all the in-game settings. Since this particular game doesn't use any other upscaler, changing the TSR to something else will just reset it. Or you could just install one of the INI mods from Nexus Mods. Maybe you could be the one to work out the bottlenecks of this game and make it run better. Silent Hill F, also a UE5 game with DX11 support, also has a similar issue, but this game requires an additional parameter. The steps for filling in your custom Engine INI are the same, but here's the reason why you also needed to create the custom game user settings INI, because you'll have to put in these parameters in this file. You can choose to put in TAA, FXAA or FSR. For FSR, make sure it is AMD_FSR. And after entering the same launch commands as I showed for Expedition 33, you should be able to easily get into the intro menu. Then now you can adjust the in-game graphics settings to suit. I've put everything on the lowest settings with screen percentage set to 50%. Just make sure you don't touch the custom preset or you'll end up resetting it to TSR. The first part of the game on the mountain will not perform very well with the default variables populated in your custom Engine INI. Let's try editing the custom user settings and Engine INI files by adjusting a few parameters. As virtual shadow maps are a DX12 SM6 feature, they won't be utilised in DX11, so let's lower and turn off all the parameters related to virtual shadow maps. This looks a bit better, doesn't it? Interesting thing is, if I go up close to this house, the frame rate almost goes up to 60. It's probably due to it occluding all of the other objects behind it, which get cold from being rendered, likewise when I look down onto the ground. This may be a good sign for the playability of this game on this device, because I think most of the action happens in the tight-knit spaces inside the town, where everything is occluded. But there are still some bottlenecks around, maybe due to certain types of foliage and trees that might be rendered differently. Wonder if it has anything to do with the nanite fallback method, because nanite isn't supported in DX11. It's likely the devs didn't bother to waste time creating more than one LOD, because why would they?
Nobody should be using DX11 anymore, and we shouldn't be trying to run high-end games on our phones.
This particular area with the garden seems to be very heavy. What if I turn things down a bit more by changing the upscaler to TAA? This is a bit better now, but the bottleneck is still around this garden. Is it the garden, or that shed, or the fence posts, or all these little items? I'm going to try something. I found a Reddit post of a few other parameters related to view distance. What if I copy them over to my engine INI and adjust the values to really lower them down? Now we'll be able to really see where all the bottlenecks are. Even with the view distance set to 0.1, you can still see the houses and some trees in the distance, which don't seem to be affected by those parameters. Let's go back to this really heavy area. The performance is slightly better, but only slightly. But still, it doesn't seem to have made a difference here. I wonder if it has anything to do with those houses. But when I look in this direction here, which shows the whole town with all the houses, the performance is still better. So maybe it's not the houses. I don't know. Maybe one of you guys might be able to figure this out. There's one more thing I want to try. Let's turn the heat up a bit.